Videos episode. God is good. All the time. All the time, God is good. Today we got a special video. Let's get right to it. But before we get right to it, let me tell you about something real quick.
Hot and blue with cold. This phenomenon is an instance of cross-modal correspondence, a perception where multiple sensory modalities interact. In this case, our visual perception is connected to our perception of temperature. There are a few other examples of this, like synesthesia, a word that traces back to Greek words that mean together sensation. People with synesthesia can associate things like numbers and colors, so 2 might be violet and 5 might be yellow. There's also the McGurk effect, where the same sound can elicit different perceptions based on how we see a person speaking that sound.
Ba ba, ba ba, ba ba.
Here, our visual perception and auditory perception are becoming intertwined. The Booba-Kiki effect is another instance of this. If I present these two images to you, which one would you call Booba and which one would you call Kiki? Both American college undergraduates and Tamil speakers in India are more likely to call the left shape Kiki and the right shape Booba. The way we see these shapes is interacting with the way we hear sounds. But for this video, I'm mostly concerned with color. In 1969, Brent Berlin and Paul Kay studied 20 different languages from around the world, and the words they have for different colors. They identified a total of 11 basic color categories: white, black, red, green, yellow, blue, brown, purple, pink, orange, and gray. In particular, they noticed that some languages didn't have all 11 words, and that there was a pattern for which words a language had. Words for brown, purple, pink, orange, and gray were never present in languages that didn't already distinguish between green and blue. They broke this pattern down into a sequence. Purple, pink, orange, and gray come after brown. Brown comes after blue. Blue is preceded by both green and yellow. Green and yellow come after red. And finally, the most basic language categories are dark cool and light warm, encompassing the set of all cool colors and warm colors as two categories. Now, it's important to mention that this study has been criticized. It assumes an ethnocentric bias based on Western scientific and political thought. It's basically implying this idea of progress, where more primitive cultures have not sufficiently evolved to capture the true categories of color that the Western languages have. I don't think Berlin and Kay have successfully proven that speakers of so-called primitive languages can't perceive the same range of colors that we can. They just use different category systems to describe them. But what can be said conclusively is that according to the World Color Survey, people all over the world seem to perceive blue as cool and red as warm. Now, this might not be particularly surprising. We make all kinds of associations between colors and concepts. In video games, the health bar is often red, the mana bar is usually blue, and stamina is green. We often associate red with love, anger, or power. Blue has a sophisticated, reliable corporate vibe. Orange is usually associated with energy, taste, extroversion, or amusement. But these symbols vary cross-culturally. Buddhist monks wear orange robes, where orange symbolizes enlightenment. In placebo studies, pills with hot colors like red or yellow work better as stimulants, whereas pills with cool colors like blue or purple work better as depressants. These results do seem to depend on culture, though. Purple was historically associated with royalty, because purple dye was made from a species of sea snail, which excreted it from a single gland, the hypobranchial gland, in very small quantities. This made the dye very rare, and was usually only available to the very wealthy. So just because of this coincidence, that psychological association emerged. The one color association that remains consistent across cultures is cool and warm. This might just be coincidence, but it taps into a much more universal one. Our skin gets red when we're warm, and goes blue when we're cold. When we gaze at a warm, sunny landscape, we're presented with warm colors. When we gaze at a cold, overcast day, we're presented with cool colors. So what even is color in the first place? I'm going to argue that there are two ways of describing it, which are basically captured by two figures: Newton and Goethe. Let's start with Newton in the scientific description of light. Visible light can be understood as waves of electromagnetic radiation. The human eye can perceive wavelengths of about 400 to 700 nanometers, where 1 nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. The visible colors on this spectrum increase from red to violet, following the mnemonic Roy G. Biv, which is also a great song by Boards of Canada. The retinas of our eyes have things called cone cells. We have 3 types of those. One responds really well to blue light, one to green, and one to red. The colors we see in the world are the result of the way in which these receptors respond to different levels of blues, greens, and reds that are reflected by materials. In the book, The Physics and Chemistry of Color by Kurt Nassau, he enumerates 15 different causes of color, including everything from the incandescence of flames, the rotations of blue ice and water, and the interference of soap bubbles. A lot of our scientific understanding of color has its roots in an experiment by Isaac Newton conducted in 1704. He constructed a triangular prism and shone a sunbeam through it, refracting its light. Colors emerged from this process of refraction, which he called a spectrum. About 100 years later, Goethe, the German poet responsible for Faust, became interested in color too. Goethe knew about Newton's experiments and tested it himself with prisms he borrowed from a friend. As you do. We've all got that one friend who always has a bunch of prisms on hand. While Newton was concerned with systematically analyzing color in a scientific way, Goethe was interested in color as we see it. He conducted experiments with colored shadows. He noticed that if a colored light is shone on an object, and a white light is shone on its opposite side, we perceive the shadow as the color's complement. In his color wheel, he situated these complementary colors opposite one another. In his view, our perception strives for unity. Yellow demands violet, orange demands blue, purple demands green, and vice versa. Another instance of this is the phenomenon of accidental color. Here, I've made the screen yellow. Pause the video and stare into the yellow for 30 seconds or so, and then unpause. Your eyes had become accustomed to the yellow, and when the screen abruptly switched to white, your perception conjured a violet hue. Our eye wants to bring harmony to our visual experience. The eye creates freedom for itself by producing the opposite of that which is forced upon it, creating in this way a satisfying whole. Goethe was also very concerned with how color affects us. The color palette of a scene tells us about the seasons and cycles of our world. They show us how to tell one thing from another. We wouldn't be able to spot these berries if they weren't brightly colored. We see certain colors as warm and textural. We see others as cold and spatial. Yellows seem to come towards us, and blues seem to recede away. Not only is color associated with temperature, but also proximity and distance. Goethe took this so seriously that his home was painted very deliberately, with a yellow dining room to create a sense of warmth and pleasure, and a greenish-blue study to promote a stimulating, calming environment. Where Newton's approach was analytic, Goethe's approach was poetic. These aren't necessarily contradictory views either, they're just two ways of looking at things. To elucidate this distinction, consider the scientist Mary. She exists in a black and white world, but she can still study color. She has access to physical descriptions of color. She can tell you which wavelengths correspond to each color, but she can't see them. She has no conscious experience of color. Now suppose Mary is able to exit this black and white world and take in the perceptual experience of color for the first time. The question is, will Mary gain any new understanding? This thought experiment was proposed by Frank Jackson in 1982. Newton approached color as Mary did, from her black and white world, while Goethe was concerned with the understanding Mary achieved from actually seeing color. Goethe urged that physical descriptions of color only tell half the story. We can't separate the color in the world from the color as we see it. He didn't view humans as passive observers of things. For him, the outer world calls forth the inner world, meeting in a participatory interaction. Color isn't just light particles out there in the world, nor is it a conscious representation of the light in the world. Instead, color arises through the interplay of light and sight. So in this way, we don't just take color in. Color emerges from our interaction with the world. In a sense, we put a little bit of ourselves into the color. In the book Interaction of Color, the artist Joseph Albers discusses the way in which color is relative. In visual perception, a color is almost never seen as it really is, as it physically is. This fact makes color the most relative medium in art. Here's an experiment he describes. There are 3 pots of water in front of you, containing warm, lukewarm, and cold water. You dip your hands into each outer container, left hand in the leftmost pot, and right hand in the rightmost pot. You perceive 2 different temperatures, warm on the left and cold on the right. But then you dip both hands in the middle container. You perceive 2 different temperatures again, but this time in reverse order. Your left hand feels cold, and your right hand feels warm. But in reality, the water is neither of these temperatures. It's lukewarm. The context of our prior experience altered our perception. In the same way that the relative temperature of our hands deceives us in this haptic illusion, where physical fact and our conscious experience don't match, Optical illusions also deceive. They cause us to see colors other than those with which we are confronted physically. Remember this dress? As of the recording of this video, this meme blew up just over 8 years ago. People argued endlessly over whether the dress was black and blue or white and gold. The reason nobody could agree was because people's visual systems were interpreting the photograph in different ways. In particular, different people assumed different conditions of illumination. When we look at a scene with different levels of illumination, we're able to recognize different colors as the same, a phenomenon called color constancy. Depending on how you initially interpreted the illumination of this photograph, you could see the dress with completely different colors. Here's another illusion you've probably seen before. We have a cylinder casting a shadow on a floor of tiles. It appears that the tiles A and B are different colors. A looks gray, while B looks white. But when you scrutinize the image more closely, you realize that these tiles are in fact identical. The context of the scene and the interpretation we have for what's happening is changing the way we see these colors. Even now, when you know that these colors are the same, you don't see them that way. Okay, last one. Take a look at the circles in the middle. The left circle appears red, and the right circle appears green. But once again, if I zoom in, it becomes clear that each circle is in fact yellow. All of these illusions demonstrate a key insight that Goethe knew.